play this interview. Now, I might fast forward because there might be some introduction, like announcements. I'll skip that part.
Welcome to Lever Time, the flagship podcast from The Lever, an independent investigative news outlet. As always, I'm your host, David Sirota. On today's show, a very special guest, Marianne Williamson, the best-selling author, the political activist, the 2020 Democratic presidential candidate, and now the 2024 Democratic presidential candidate. We discuss her jump in the polls against incumbent President Joe Biden, a jump that seems fueled by young people. We also talk about the Democratic Party's general hostility towards primary challenges. We talk about her critique of the Biden administration's climate policies, and we discuss the persistence of science denialism in everything from environmental policy to health policy. It was a really wide-ranging discussion. This week, our paid subscribers also get some special bonus segments. Right now on our premium feed, you can hear the extended portion of last week's interview with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the portion of the discussion where
I did want to play this because it's funny. Listen to what they talk about, the comments that is made about that interview. Watch this. It's so funny.
Ask her to describe in detail the influence of money in Congress and how it really works on a day-to-day level. Also coming up on the premium feed, a discussion with the acclaimed economist Richard Wolff about how progressives should think about the escalating economic tensions between the United States and China. If you're not already a paying subscriber and you want access to the premium feed, bullshit that is corporate media. As always, I'm here today with Lever Times producer Jared with
the comments that were just flooding this short little video clip.
Here we go, right here.
Showed me just how,
watch this,
when you saw it on Instagram or Twitter, the comments that were just flooding this short little video clip, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And we first just cut some interesting clips that she had said about statements about Clarence Thomas, and we post that online. And immediately, when you saw it on Instagram or Twitter, the comments that were just flooding this short little video clip showed me just how, I don't know if I think that she's polarizing, but she just creates a lot of passionate responses out of people. And they were saying just responses all over the place about AOC, about how she was, a sellout, or how you were doing softball questions, and all of these different responses. And this was for like a 1-minute clip before we'd even.
So he's saying it was prejudged. People said it's a softball, only seen a 1-minute clip. That's all right.
Posted the full interview. People were already making up their minds about what they thought about the interview. And I really hadn't seen something like that from the inside. What did you make of it?
I mean, she's a lightning rod, so people have strong.
And the full interview came out. We covered a segment, and it was a softball like we thought. It was an accurate description. And so let's
opinions. And I saw some of the allegations. Oh, you guys did a softball interview. You know, I mean, here's the thing, and I tweeted this, and it's something that I learned when I was a radio host here in Denver for 5 years, everyday drive time radio host. And it's like, listen, you can ask really tough questions, but you don't have to be an asshole about it. Just because you're not yelling at somebody.
That has nothing to do with it. If you ask a question, answer this, and the person doesn't answer it, and you don't follow up, that makes it a softball. It doesn't always have to be about tone. The softball is the lack of follow-up. Like, it was terrible. She said a blithering, like, word salad, and you just said, oh, okay, let's move on. Fuck out of here.
Screaming at them. Doesn't mean.
Let's move from this. Let's get to Marianne Williamson stuff here.
A host becomes a WW fused about how tough illicit in government and politics became aware of Marianne Williamson 2020 Democrat outsider candidate for president who has never held elected office. That's something that Democratic voters have never
70s
done.
Music for
Here's our interview with Marianne Williamson. Hey, Marianne, how you doing?
I'm well, thank you, David. Nice to see you.
It's great to see you too. So you are running for president. You're running in the Democratic primary in 2024. You ran in 2020 in the primary. Let's start there. What did you learn from the 2020 Democratic primary? What are the 2, 3, 4 big takeaways that you learned from that experience that most informs your campaign in 2024?
I learned that the political media industrial complex is even more corrupt and in a way more vicious than I would have feared. And I learned that the voters are even more wonderful than I would have hoped. I learned the real gap that exists between what I have experienced as the dignity, the decency, the open-mindedness, and the basic goodwill that people want to at least aspire to among the voters, and a political system that does more to obstruct the expression of that high-mindedness than to inspire it.
The Democratic Party seems incredibly hostile to the idea of primaries in general, and in particular, primaries against incumbents. I've said this before, I'll say it again. The hardest thing to do in all of American politics, really at any level, from all the way from city council all the way up to the presidency, is to successfully challenge an incumbent in a Democratic primary. That almost never, ever happens. It is so incredibly rare. And I've worked on a bunch of primaries, Democratic primaries. I worked for Ned Lamont against Joe Lieberman. I worked for my wife's Democratic primary against an incumbent. That was actually successful, one of the very rare ones. I've worked obviously for Bernie Sanders in 2020. Now, granted, that wasn't against necessarily a sitting incumbent, but a kind of quasi-incumbent, former vice president. So knowing that, I would ask you your opinion on why you think that not only is the Democratic Party leadership seems to be so hostile to the idea of a primary, but clearly there's a voting base that looks skeptically upon primary candidates against incumbents. I wonder if you agree with that and why you think that is.
First of all, I do agree with it, although I make a distinction, as you sort of just did, between the Democratic Party and the Democratic establishment leadership. The latter is clearly hostile in all the ways that you said. The Democratic electorate has become deeply codependent in its relationship to the DNC and the Democratic leadership in a way that, number one, you don't see on the Republican side. And number two, wasn't true when I was growing up. When Eugene McCarthy and Bobby Kennedy said they were going to primary Johnson, nobody said they shouldn't or couldn't or even thought it was odd. Even when Teddy Kennedy said,
okay, I just got to take breaks with her, with this constant bringing up old people.
he was going to primary Carter. Nobody thought, oh, how dare he? So that narrative hadn't been created yet. It's really a reversion to a time 100 years ago when a bunch of men sat around a table smoking their cigars, thinking that they had the right, they were entitled.
Like, this sounds like a romantic novel, just around some tables smoking some cigars. This is how she talks. I'm trying to stay focused here and take this seriously. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes here
To determine who the candidate should be, which to me is particularly outrageous because the presumption there is they got this. And if anything has been proven over the last few decades, they don't got this. So the idea that they know better, the idea that we should go, oh, they know better is particularly absurd in today's world, I think.
I mean, right after Bernie Sanders won New Hampshire in 2020, Jeff Bezos' newspaper, the Washington Post, published a piece with the headline. This is the headline. I'm going to read it to you. It's time to give the elites a bigger say in choosing the president. So, and I picked that out because I think it does illustrate that it has been normalized, this idea that primaries are bad, challenges to incumbents are bad, the party bosses, if you will, the elites, the political class, should choose party nominees. Now, last week we had...
How is this easier than running as a Green Party candidate? You're complaining that they're leaving you out of polls. You're complaining about dark money in the primaries. You're complaining about moving South Carolina up. How is this easier than running as a Green Party candidate? As an independent candidate, if you in those states that where you can run as an independent. Like, this doesn't make any sense.
Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on our show, and I asked her about this hostility to primaries. Her as somebody who was one of the rare few who has won a Democratic primary against a Democratic incumbent. She said, as somebody who had won a primary, that she would never speak ill of primaries, and essentially thinks the primary process is a healthy one. But I would ask you to address the trope that you hear so often, which is to say the trope that says primaries are bad for potential nominees. Primaries weaken a party, that the more the party fights with each other in primaries, the more it imperils the party's ability to win a general election. I'm sure that has been...
It's like this push for Marianne Williamson. The reason is so transparently a grift is because it almost feels like they can't be serious that they think Marianne Williamson is going to win. So then why are they doing it? Like, why does a professional managerial class just want to go through the motions of having a candidate that they know that's not going to do anything? Like, what is the need to have a candidate in the cycle? If you don't have one that's viable, like they like to use, if you don't have one, you just don't run one. Why does there need to be one? It doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm trying to give these people the benefit of the doubt that this is just not blatant corruption. I'm trying to find another reason, but absent any logical reason, that's all I can fall back on. Let's continue this a little more.
Been thrown at you. I'm sure it will be thrown at you. What do you say to that argument when a voter or somebody in the media brings that up?
It's not an argument. It's a narrative created by the DNC and the Biden administration in order to gaslight people. Look, in 2016, there was certainly a big fight among the Republicans, right?
Why do the progressives are essentially, it's like they're in a relationship, but they're fighting somebody who doesn't want them and fighting them to take me back. Like, take me back. And the person's like, man, I'm good. I don't get the, like, the DNC doesn't want you.
Right? But Trump won. So this idea that if a lot of people are arguing in the primary, that somehow that's going to make us less capable in winning the general election is ridiculous. As a matter of fact, I would argue that if the DNC had kept their hands off the scale in 2016, let it just be Hillary or Bernie, whichever one the voters chose, that Trump would never have become president. So if anything, the evidence would imply that a primary is a good thing. Among other things, it's democracy. The traditional role of the party is to stay out of this until the voters have spoken. Then once...
We got it. Primaries are good. We're for primaries. You're just not a good candidate. That's all. So let's go forward 30 seconds and see if they change.
Clear the field so that Biden is just the one we all go with.
Yeah. Y'all harping on this primary stuff. Let's
the whole country got to see who he was because of that experience. Absolutely. So the narrative is it's nothing but PR. That's all that narrative is. It's not an in good faith argument.
I agree. I am somebody who thinks that primaries make candidates stronger. I have been dismayed by, again, I'm not surprised by in my view, it's the voters and the activists. Majority in one of Bernie Sanders' supporters published an op-ed in the middle of the campaign. She was a supporter. I'll offer some context for why I'm asking that. Writ large,
that actually admits the malfeasance of the political system across the board and commits to a season of change and repair.
So you mentioned corporate influence over the government writ large. I presume that includes, in your analysis, the Biden administration. I want to ask you to be specific about that. And I want to offer some context for why I'm asking that. When I was working for Bernie Sanders in 2020, Zephyr Teachout, one of Bernie Sanders' supporters, published an op-ed in the middle of the campaign. She was a supporter of Bernie, saying that Joe Biden has a corruption problem. And she listed out a number of places in which he had served his donors, including one of the most prominent ones was the credit card industry, the financial industry, in pushing, for instance, the horrible bankruptcy bill that crushed a lot of working class people. And I bring this up because when she published this and said he has a corruption problem, it became an enormous controversy in a kind of how dare you sort of way, that the allegation was portrayed as so outrageous and out of bounds, and ultimately Bernie Sanders apologized for it. Now, I was horrified and dismayed at the entire apology. I thought this is the kind of discussion that should be had in Democratic primary. Money went into Joe Biden and policy came out. And I don't even understand why that's controversial to say. So I want to ask you to be specific about where you think corporate influence has been most pervasive and intense in the policies of the Biden administration, and what you might say to folks who would say that making such allegations is out of line.
Out of line. I love that. I'm an American. The Democratic Party should not be telling a Democratic voter what's quote unquote out of line. That's really, there's that codependent relationship right there. First of all, the most obvious one is the Willow Project. The president had said that there would be no further drilling on public.
So what David Sirota did was bring up an article wrote by Zephyr Teachout. Is that how you say his name? Jordan Sheridan brought up this same thing, and she had a sort of a different response than this. And I have the video here. He's talking about Bernie Sanders going soft on Joe Biden, and he brings up Zephyr Teachout. I'm pretty sure it's in his conversation.
My opinion, during Bernie's 2 runs, I think he showed up to a knife fight holding a spoon. God bless him, but he would only go up to a certain line. There were many opportunities that he had to offer specifics on corruption regarding Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. Honestly, I think he let Joe Biden get away with political murder in terms of his civil rights record, his record in terms of African Americans, mass incarceration. I understand, his attitude was run a positive campaign, no personal attacks, but you have to contrast. You have to sometimes play hardball. And I think whether somebody runs in the primary or as a third party, I mean, for example, Zephyr Teachout, who was a surrogate of Bernie Sanders in 2020, wrote a piece for The Guardian. It was fact-based. It pointed out that Joe Biden had some corruption issues, and Bernie's campaign, coming from Bernie, totally walked it back. If you run against Biden, are you willing to go there? I mean, not personal pot shots, but on his record, because I think the Democratic electorate was, a lot of that got hid from them due to media and other resources.
Bernie is a U.S. senator. He is an institutionalist, and I think he had some assumptions, had some trust that if Biden won, we know he wanted to be labor secretary, then was not given that position and so forth. Bernie has done so much for this country and certainly has done so much for the progressive movement. I don't want to be taking out a baseball bat against Bernie here either. We all can look and we can learn.
So we're not going to learn from our mistakes because you're so worried about your stability politics. You're so worried about being mean to your friends that we're not going to critically analyze what went wrong. And then
she goes on further in this video. I cannot believe it's not quite contradictory, but it sure does walk right up to the line of being contradictory. Let's listen.
In the policies of the Biden administration, and what you might say to folks who would say that making such allegations is out of line.
Out of line. I love that. I'm an American. The Democratic Party should not be telling a Democratic voter what's quote unquote out of line. That's really, there's that codependent relationship right there. First of all, the most obvious one is the Willow Project. The president had said that there would be no further drilling on public lands. The president had said that he recognizes that climate change is the existential threat to.
This is the easy one, is why they pick up on this one. Because the obvious one to me is Ukraine. That's the obvious one to me. But the climate change one is the one they're going to pick up on because that's the one, that's the safe one they can do. You can't go against the military industrial complex and run in a Democratic Party. Let's listen a little more before we end this segment.
To the human race, and yet he has provided more permits for oil drilling than even Trump did. And of course, the Willow Project, $8 billion to ConocoPhillips so that they can extract fossil fuels on the north slopes of Alaska. That's the most.
Now, this same person, you see how this is the thing that about progressive Democrats is so weird. In the primary, all these bad things you're saying, it suddenly goes away. When you lose the primary and it's time for the general election, this same person who you was telling me is terrible, somehow you're going to be telling me it can beat Donald Trump when you drop out of the race. That's the problem. Let's listen.
Most obvious one at the moment, when it came time for old Labor Joe to show that he really meant it when it came to the railroad workers and their struggle with their bosses. When really at that time, all they were asking was for sick pay. He came down on the side of the bosses. He had said that there would be a $15 an hour minimum wage, which should be the minimum that we're even considering. Once the parliamentarian said that it couldn't make it into the bill, he certainly found it convenient to hide behind her skirts. And even though they cut in half the child poverty rate with their child tax credit, when that expired 6 months later, they didn't get around to permanentizing it. In other words, they, in the final analysis, more often than not, come down on the side of business. Now, this is how I see Biden. The way I see Biden related to these things is how I see all the corporate Democrats. They try their best to have it both ways. They do see the pain, and
this is the shielding part for the Democrats. So is that they're trying to have it both ways. They're not like the GOP that's just evil. They're trying to have it both. That's what she's trying to sell us. Because she's going to have to sell Democrats. She can't fuck up the Democratic Party that much. Because she has to be able to sheep herd you back. And it's the thing that progressive Democrats have to sell. And this is why they never attack Capitol. It's that we just have to get the corrupt corporatists out and everything will be okay. There's nothing wrong with the capitalist system.
They are interested in and will make efforts to ameliorate the stress that people are experiencing. as long as it doesn't challenge that underlying corporate profit bottom line that always inevitably makes the return of that pain inevitable. They'll alleviate stress, but they will not stand for genuine fundamental economic reform. And I do.
So let's go a little bit deeper on that, because it's a topic that I have been reporting on for a very long time. And I think you articulated it there quite explicitly and quite articulately. There is an underlying theory in the corporate wing of the Democratic Party. Let's be very precise about this.
Oh my God.
Their ideology, I mean, what you could look at it and say their ideology is just corruption. Everything is just a patina for corruption. But taking them at their word on some of the policies, for instance, that you mentioned, if you take that as an ideology, there does seem to be a theory that we can solve major problems, major economic problems, and also preserve the economic status quo, that we can help millions and millions of people, and the rising tide can lift all boats, and there can also be yachts as well. I don't believe that that's true. I believe there is a which side are you on question, that in order for millions of people to, for instance, have decent health care, you cannot have healthcare billionaires. Those two things cannot exist together. I wonder if you agree, and I would also ask you whether you think that really is their theory, whether that really is their principled ideology, or whether you do think it is just essentially a cover for corruption.
I think that many of those people are so buffered emotionally from the ravages of human suffering that is on the other side of the gates that they live behind, that they don't honestly recognize what it means.
She literally can't say the people in her class are corrupt. She will not bring herself to say it. Now, they just have blinders on. And if they didn't have the blinders on, their hearts would be softened and they would help. I don't get this candidate. I don't get the backing of this candidate. I don't get why people wouldn't listen to this and go, oh, this is some bullshit. Move on. Who's next? But there's people who claim they listen to her and then they're transformed. Always some to be milquetoast people, though. That they
I wonder if you agree, and I would also ask you whether you think that really is their theory, whether that really is their principled ideology, or whether you do think it is just essentially a cover for corruption.
So he's asking, do you really think they're playing both sides? Or do you really think that the play to act like they care is just to cover for corruption? That's the question.
I think that many of those people are so buffered emotionally from the ravages of human suffering that is on the other side of the gates that they live behind, that they don't honestly recognize what it means that 18 million Americans cannot afford to fulfill the prescriptions that their doctors.
I mean, there's no comment needed there.
Doctors give them. They clearly don't recognize what it means that 68,000 people die in this country every year from lack of health care. They don't understand what it means really on an emotional, visceral level, that 85% of Americans are underinsured or uninsured, that 1 in 4 million.
I almost messed up her talking point there.
That 1 in 4 Americans live with medical debt, that Americans are out there rationing their insulin because they're not hungry and they have decent health care.
Let's flip this around a little bit. There are some folks who say, look, compared to the past 2 Democratic presidents, Joe Biden represents a significant policy step forward.
Oh my God.
They look at, as an example, they look at Bill Clinton deregulation.
We have to disconnect ourselves from this the professional managerial class. Like, these are people with degrees and experience sounding like morons in their strategy. Let's continue here.
Deregulating Wall Street, Bill Clinton's welfare cuts. By the way, FYI, things that Joe Biden himself supported. So let's just put that as a not too small asterisk. They look at Barack Obama essentially using the healthcare reform debate to prop up the health insurance industry, using the Wall Street crisis to bail out and prop up Wall Street. They look at all of that and then see Joe Biden, and they see somebody who has appointed people who are more affiliated with organized labor. They look at, for instance, the American Rescue Plan as something so much better than the bank bailouts. And I just want to be clear on my position here. I mean, I think the American Rescue Plan was a terrific thing. I think it actually was the best thing that's happened as a piece of legislation that I can.
The people we're teaming with, people say, oh, we agree with them. Really? They're fine. The rescue plan was great legislation. Legislation that doesn't fix none of the problems of the poor and the working class. There's no such thing as fixing child poverty if you don't fix their parents' poverty. That is not a thing. I'm waiting for the day to go on a corporate network and somebody to ask me about child poverty. I'm going to go, that is not a thing. You just made that up. You can't eliminate child poverty. Does the child not stay with his parents who's still in poverty? Anyway, tangent, let's continue.
I can remember in my entire lifetime. And they look at that and they say, well, Joe Biden is the best president the Democratic president in a.
So he's describing liberals, he's describing conservatives and liberals and saying the ones that pretend like they're progressives. And he's saying these people, these progressives, the center right progressives, they're saying, what do you mean? He's been great. Remember AOC showed up after the State of the Union and said he was great progressive? Now all of a sudden it's this flip-flopping. But anyway, let's continue.
In a long time. And so we should reelect him. What do you say to that?
So the American Rescue Plan was good, but its effects are no longer here. Build Back Better plan would have been good. But basically what you're saying is that they have given cookies as opposed to crumbs. And what I'm saying is that you can't live on cookies either. We shouldn't be comparing this to what
analogies is terrible too.
What a Democratic president did 10 or 20 years ago. We should be comparing it to every other advanced democracy in the world. Every other advanced democracy in the world has universal health care. Every other advanced democracy in the world has tuition-free college, which we had until the 1960s. And when I was growing up, Blue Cross Blue Shield was a nonprofit. Every other advanced democracy in the world has free childcare and has paid family leave and sick pay and a guaranteed living wage. That inside the Beltway conversation you're having doesn't mean anything to the average American voter. And even that, staying within the confines of that conversation is staying within this bubble with which Democrats lose and out of which Americans.
So I'm not gonna use my brain on that. Let's go back to the video.
And are always so shocked when they lost because they don't realize that none of it has anything to do with the visceral experience of the majority of Americans. If you're among the 20% of Americans for whom the economy is doing fine, then a lot of those things that you just said matter. The point is 20% is like an enchanted economic island surrounded by a vast sea of economic despair.
These phrases that she has are so fucking terrible, man. Jesus, she's these vast economic. I mean, I can't tell if she's just stupid and just trying to use words, or she's this unaware and she's using these words to try to appear to be spirit. I don't know, but these are misplaced phrases. They're so freaking stupid.
That is what Bernie spoke to. That is what Trump spoke to, although in Bernie's case, he actually meant it. But this other stuff of the conversation that you're mentioning that the corporate Democrats are having, it's losing. It doesn't mean anything. In fact, it infuriates for good reason on some level. The average American who is struggling and who is really resentful that those kind of effete arguments are made to keep them from being able to simply survive and to feed their children and to have a decent wage and to get health care.
I guess, but I was going to ask you a question about some of the current polls, but before I do, just to put a final point on this part of the conversation. The other argument that you hear all the time is, well, listen, okay, Marianne, you're right. Joe Biden hasn't done X, hasn't done Y, hasn't done Z, and has done A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all this bad stuff over here. But he really wants to do all of this good stuff. The problem is that they only have 51 senators, and there's always Joe Manchin and Sinema and whoever the rotating villain is, and that Joe Biden's really trying.
Whoever the rotating villain, you see how they pick up on our language and then insert it as if they're talking like they're having a discussion like us. You're part of this establishment, David Sirota, but you're using rotated villain like you're outside of it. And why are you supporting a party, advocating for people to vote for this party that's using rotating villains that you just acknowledged?
Trying to do the right thing, and that people who say that he hasn't done what needs to be done are unsophisticated in their understanding of what the politically possible is. How do you respond to that?
I respond as a woman. And when a man keeps cheating on you and keeps cheating on you and keeps cheating on you, but then every 2 or 4 years comes back and says, oh, baby, come on, give me one more chance. At a certain point, that woman says, no. There's always an excuse with those people. Can you imagine the Republicans hiding behind the skirts of the parliamentarian when
I'm trying to understand, is she this bad intentionally? This bad? This is terrible. How is the very point she just made, not the very argument of why nobody should be supporting her? So let's rewind it and see if you caught it here. 30 seconds.
Needs to be done are unsophisticated in their understanding of what the politically possible is. How do you respond to that?
I respond as a woman. And when a man keeps cheating on you and keeps cheating on you and keeps cheating on you, but then every 2 or 4 years comes back and says, oh, baby, come on, give me one more chance. At a certain point, that woman says, no. There's always an excuse with those people. Can you imagine the Republicans hiding behind the skirts of the parliamentarian when they really wanted to get something done? It's true that they will abuse their power, but the Democrats won't even use it. They're mealy-mouthed, and they'll always come up with an excuse. There are plenty of executive orders that the president could have effectuated, and more than anything, the president could have used the bully pulpit in ways that he has refused to.
She's saying woman's going to keep getting cheated on. Eventually, every 4 years, you say, yeah, you're eventually going to say, no more forgiving. But she's saying she's the last fling. So is Marianne Williamson saying her campaign is that last fling before we supposed to go no? I thought it was last year. I thought it was 2020 or 2016. Like, how does that not apply to you? Not supporting you because the Democratic Party is the one that keeps cheating. Get it. Anyway, what it's not necessarily a headache. It's just I have to cover this stuff, and this shit is just because this has to be covered. Marianne Williamson announces Peter Daou as the her campaign manager, and then goes and does this bullshit ass interview on the Lever. These things have to be caught out. If these things are just left to go out into the ethos of the left, it's made to be like there's nothing wrong, and we just keep chugging along with this nonsense, the same chugging along that's been going on for decades, that's gotten us nowhere. Understand the people, the disappointment you have in AOC. These are the people who told us to do this. David Sirotas, the Janks, the Kyles, the same people, not Jank, but Kyle, the same people who pushed AOC and said change, they're now saying it's Marianne Williamson. They have to try to inspire you, the Bernie Sanders industrial complex, the one, the left media, white left media. They have to try to inspire you with these garbage candidates so that you keep watching them. I'm about to put a bow on this episode here. Didn't have anything scheduled, so I saw no content, and I was like, oh, I'm operations, so I need to make sure there's some content. So I created this. I wanted to do this actually Monday with the Nick and CJ show, but no harm, no foul. We got plenty to cover, like the guy being sentenced to 70 years for spitting at a police. That we're going to be covering that on Monday. But let's finish a couple more minutes of this, and then this is fucking terrible.
To do. So you're right. He has made some appointments, like with the NLRB, with labor.
Did a deliberate decision to move to the right. There have been a series of things that he's done. I mean, the breaking the rail strike, the Willow Project. There was an immigration issue. There's an argument. There's some folks saying out there that this represents a deliberate decision to move to the right in advance of the election. Actually, to go back to our AOC interview, she said this is extremely dangerous. It's not only bad on policy, it's politically dangerous. But there are other folks who said this isn't a attack to the right. This is who Joe Biden has been and always has been, and this is not any kind of change. I'm just curious. Do you think he's trying to move to the right deliberately, or is this just an expression of what the administration is?
I don't care. You know, it appears that since Ron Klain left, there's this move to the right.
What?
Some of them have actually said, not as an interpretation, but as an actual statement of the will of the campaign, they're going to move toward.
Ever since Ron Klain left, that's when he moved to the right. I don't understand how you can say this is the person that's supposed to challenge down. This is so disheartening on a weekend. This is so disheartening that people are supporting this. Oh man, boy, there is such a void of left leadership that we are being taken down these just garbage lanes that we're being taken down by the professional managerial class, and they don't give a fuck.